Yep, it's induced demand, and the other harmful impact, is, I talked about those displacement figures of people and tax base. That is the direct displacement impact, but the collateral damage around it is actually much worse, right? When a big freeway comes in, it suppresses property value and investment all around it. Nobody wants to live next to a freeway. No one wants to build a business or a park near a freeway. I-35 in Austin is trying to do some great heroic things of trying to put some caps and stitches in, but it's spending money to make things worse to then spend even more money to make it better. The answer, of course, that we all know, should be to just not put the freeway there. Freeways shouldn't go through cities. The city would be in much better financial straits if that were just simply the case.
Welcome back to Cities in Motion. I'm Jacob, the podcast for anyone who wants cities built for people. Each week, we dig into the systems, design, and culture that shape urban life and explore how smarter transportation, better planning, and thoughtful policy can make our communities more livable. Today, we're headed to Houston, one of the fastest growing metros in the country and a city at real crossroads. From rapid development and highway expansion to housing affordability and climate resilience, the choices Houston makes right now will shape daily life for millions of people. I'm joined by Ruben and Matthew from Strong Towns Houston. We talk about what strong towns look like in a city as big and complex as Houston, how local advocates are pushing for safer streets and more financially resilient neighborhoods, and why incremental, people-focused change matters even in places built around cars. Let's get started. Well, why don't you guys take a moment to introduce yourselves, who you are, what is Strong Towns Houston?
My name is Ruben Garza. By trade, I'm a lawyer, but in my non-lawyer life, I am an urbanist advocate and a local conversation leader for Strong Towns Houston. We are the local conversation for Strong Towns National, based out of Houston. And, I like to say that we're an urbanist, Strong Towns and Strong Towns Houston. I like to say we're an urbanist group that cares very much about, the finances of urbanism and city development. And I'll kick it off to Matt.
Yeah, I'm Matt Tetlow. I've lived not from here, but I've lived in Houston for almost a decade now. I'm an engineer by degree and day job, but like Ruben, this is kind of a passion that I think maybe in some ways, being relocated by my employer to Houston kicked off for me. An awakening of sorts. And, like Ruben said, really, we are the local chapter of the Strong Towns national, but really now international movement, trying to make Houston a stronger, more financially resilient city.
Thanks so much for introducing yourself. What is it like to apply the Strongstown approach while working in the fourth largest city in the United States? And how does that scale change what is possible?
Sure. So I guess for quick clarity, the Strong Towns approach is really focused on like bottom up incremental development as opposed to, how we've been building cities since, the end of World War II, where, the federal government essentially bankrolls highways and subsidizes mortgages and suburban style housing out on the fringe. So Strong Towns took a look at that and said, well, from a financial perspective, has that been good for cities? And the answer to that is no, versus what we've been doing previously, where, you would start from your urban core and then you would, incrementally develop around the city until you got like a more compact, walkable, mixed-use city. And so in addition to being a safety benefit, that's also really good for the city's finances too, on a the city is able to get a lot of taxable value out of dense walkable communities and relatively low maintenance or infrastructure, versus with suburban style development, it's super expensive and you're like super spread out thin. So that's the Strong Towns approach. So doing that in the fourth largest city that is so pretty spread out is kind of, the problem is that we're kind of the poster child for the suburban experiment, and that, a lot of what Strong Towns laments is kind of like amplified to an extreme in Houston. And that does make the challenges pretty difficult, where, we have such a big city and it's hard to like herd cats. But, at the same time, I think that also introduces us to a lot of new people and a lot of new faces and communities. And of course, I want to take this quick moment to shout out so many hardworking groups in Houston that understand local needs and local challenges and kind of feed their perspectives into the Strong Towns message. And, we help them, they help us on a lot of good urbanist projects. So, that will include Link Houston, Bike Houston, Friends of Columbia TAP, A Tale of Two Bridges, Walk and Roll Houston, Air Alliance Houston, Friends of Fondant Park. Matt, am I missing any?
I mean, I think we've got some other great freeway fighting orgs that we'll talk
Oh
about, but
yeah,
I think you covered a lot of them for sure. Yeah.
Tech.I.
We'll get to
Yeah.
those for sure. I think, yeah, the only thing I'd add there, to put a finer point on what Ruben said, is, you mentioned in the intro that we're the fourth largest city, and by population, that's right. We're kind of neck and neck with Chicago, so to speak. But we are also 3 times the size of Chicago, right? Our inner core, inside the 610 loop, our ring road, ring road freeway is kind of what people think of as downtown or inner loop Houston. It houses about 400 something thousand people. It's still 100 square miles. It's the size of Queens, New York, which would have 2.4 million people. So we are a big city by population, but we are a massive city by footprint. And as Ruben said, that is the thing that makes us in a pretty challenging predicament when it comes to our infrastructure and our approach to investing.
How has your background as an engineer and a lawyer, has there been any benefit to your Strong Towns work, or have you gotten any insights to urbanism and how those two can work together?
So, I mean, from a lawyer's perspective, it's definitely, and by the way, I'm here on my individual account, not on behalf of my employer.
Of course.
Speaking only for myself.
Yeah. So, from a lawyer's perspective, it's fascinating because the harder you look and dig into how we got here is that, it's codification. How did we, legalize suburbia, and how did we exclude what we now refer to as missing middle housing or walkable environments? And it's all baked in the code, giant municipal codes stacked God knows how many feet high. And I have one in particular, Matt knows, chapter 26 of the Houston Municipal Code. That entire chapter is just dedicated to parking. And so, we really, really spent so many countless hours and manpower just codifying all of this without really, I don't want to say they didn't know what they were doing, but at the same time, it was a new field we were just developing. And so we just thought immediately, well, this is like a growth engine. This is how we're growing on the suburbs. So let's codify this and then make this the law. And now you can go enforce that in court, or now you have a book to point to that says, well, this is how it should be done because it's written down, as opposed to the previous style of development where, for lack of a better descriptive term, we kind of just winged it.
Yeah, I'd say, another interesting spot is, on safe streets as an example where kind of engineering and legality intersect is, it can be very hard to change the way of doing things when, the attorneys of the world, think it's a liability to step outside the boundary, and the engineers in the world are taught to adhere to the boundary and the code and the design manual at all costs. This is something we struggle with mightily. We can talk about Houston and the degree to which our unsafe streets are uniquely unsafe in some ways, but that is, people want to see beautiful development. They want to have some walkable places, but as soon as you enter the public domain, it is just very hard in a city like ours, in any city really, to get those sorts of design changes made.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the book Killed by a Traffic Engineer, if you've read that before.
I actually
Great.
just finished it.
Yeah. Speaking along the same line, what local regulations or development rules in Houston do you think most strongly shape the kind of city we end up with?
I'll say one thing, we'll, at risk of maybe dumping on Houston too much in this podcast, because we're both very fond of Houston, right? We're here to make it better, so we focus on the improvements. But, in many ways, I think Houston's a case for how, some of the places where we've been actually looser in regulation yield some positive benefits, right? We are kind of famously one of the few cities that doesn't have sort of traditional zoning. And so when you walk around, especially kind of our core neighborhoods, you squint your eyes and you do see things like, mixed use development, right? Different commercial centers mixed in with housing. You do see missing middle housing that's, missing from the rest of the US, but you see the row homes and the 2- and 3-story apartments and things like that. So we have a lot of things, I think, where, regulation has or deregulation has done some good. We still have a lot of the shared challenges, but I think, the bigger takeaway is that, even when you get sometimes the regulation right, if the approach to infrastructure is wrong, Houston and Dallas, build the freeways and the big arterials and all that. And so for our lack of zoning and differences, it kind of looks a little like Dallas, right? And I think that's, kind of one of the key Strong Towns insights is the approach to infrastructure drives a lot of what you get, maybe even more than the regulations.
And so, and to kind of slightly piggyback off of that is, so Houston, again, famously has no formal zoning, but we have a bunch of informal rules and regulations, like any other city, parking requirements, height limitations, setback requirements, et cetera, et cetera. But I will say, to the extent that you want to learn about something that's pretty unique to Houston, is I don't know how many other cities do this, but the city of Houston has the legal authority to enforce deed restrictions. And I guess for people who don't know, deed restrictions are when a bunch of communities get together and basically like form like your homeowners association, but they also file a written contract in the county government that says, hey, this is how the community should be. And you'll drive around some neighborhoods and they'll say like such and such acres, like a deed restricted community. That means every single property within there like has to follow these codes and guides, which are not mandated by the city, it's by the community. So, you get some stereotypes where it's just like, oh, your walls have to be eggshell white or something ridiculous like that. But, there are other ones that actually do affect land use. Like some deed restrictions do say that this community is single family residential only, which that's zoning. And what's unique to Houston is like I was saying earlier, the city will actually go in and enforce that in open court for a violation, whereas normally, the homeowners associations will have to hire an attorney and go like sue or send a cease and desist letter to get non-conforming uses or not violations of HOA rules. So that's another thing that shapes how Houston operates.
Let's talk about transportation. What major transportation projects in the Houston region right now do you think will have the biggest impact on the city's long-term health, for better or worse?
I'll take the worst, I suppose. Hopefully, I don't know if it's big enough that it's followed by urbanists nationwide, but maybe it is. There's the I-45 North expansion. This is our north-south freeway, kind of from downtown up north to like our Woodlands, our kind of outer lying suburbs. It is undergoing a $12.8 billion expansion by TxDOT. It is a staggering figure. I mean, this is some of the quick facts on how you could give every homeowner $20,000 or whatever dollars, or send every Houstonian to college for a decade. It's an eye-popping number, and it's far from our only freeway project. But this is a particularly egregious one. It is displacing, I think, something like 1,200 residents, $100 million a year of tax revenue. It will be a decades-long project that will make traffic certainly worse then, if not after. And it results in a kind of a 31-lane monstrosity. And yes, that's an odd number, which may sound weird to people, but that is a hot lane that goes different directions at different times of day. So 31 lanes blanketing some of our most scenic bayou greenways. There's no question that it's not. I'll just say this: it's not a surprise that the most prolific freeway fighting book published in the last year, City Limits by Megan Kimball, not a surprise that it centers on Texas cities, right? We are very much in the trenches of pushing back against our DOTs for some very community impactful projects.
I interviewed Rethink I-35 and she brought up the same exact stuff.
Yeah.
And again, no offense to traffic engineers. I know a traffic engineer, great people. My favorite thing that they like to do is to do these projects and then call them improvements. So this highway expansion it includes I-45, but also includes there's parts of I-10 running east-west, and then that 45 also goes down to. Okay, so this is a very Houston thing too. Colloquially is State Highway 59, but it is US 69. But for some reason, Houstonians like to refer to it as just 59. So when I say 59, that's what I mean is 69. Part of the expansion also includes expanding 59 on the east side of downtown, which has been, again, famously messed up by highway expansion.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask for directions in Houston then. Dirt is already being dug up, concrete's already being laid down. Like what can you do now? What are you supposed to do to advocate now that just it's getting started?
That's a tough question. I think, part of the problem, I think, is, there is this getting the strong towns mindset around understanding what an investment is and understanding that, on the surface, it feels like politicians have thought for years that, well, okay, people will come downtown, maybe they'll spend money, it'll bring new jobs and growth. It feels like a positive thing, right? When you peel back the layers of the onion and you start to do the actual math, what you find is you're displacing things from your city that pay taxes with things that do not pay taxes to encourage people to live outside of the city and not pay your taxes. It is a financial bomb going off in your city, and it is totally terrible. Right? It makes it harder to live in the city, but more appealing to live outside of it. And the freeway doesn't pay any property tax on the land it consumes. So it is just terrible from a city budget perspective. So when your politicians start to get interested not in urbanism, but why we're so broke all the time, you do start to get traction. I think this is where Strong Towns Houston has gotten some traction a bit, because it is a unique viewpoint that maybe other urbanist groups don't actually focus on as much.
The more, I guess, you expand those highways, you're inducing those people to drive, and the more people that drive, you're going to have to repair and do more construction, and it's just a loop. And then they see the traffic, and then they're like, oh, let's expand it some more, and now it's going to be 37 lanes. Who knows? Yep,
it's induced demand, and the other harmful impact. I talked about those displacement figures of people and tax base. That is the direct displacement impact, but the collateral damage around it is actually much worse. Right? When a big freeway comes in, it suppresses property value and investment all around it. Nobody wants to live next to a freeway. No one wants to build a business or a park near a freeway. I-35 in Austin is trying to do some great heroic things of trying to put some caps and stitches in, but it's spending money to make things worse to then spend even more money to make it better. The answer, of course, that we all know should be to just not put the freeway there. Freeways shouldn't go through cities. The city would be in much better financial straits if that were just simply the case.
I mean, the silver, and it's a very, very thin silver lining, but the Harris County sued the Texas Department of Transportation 6 or 7 years ago, and they had a pretty good legal argument regarding that the highway was going to displace a lot of communities of color, so there was a potential civil rights violation. Now that lawsuit got as far as a settlement agreement and a memorandum of understanding, which is kind of like we promise we'll do these things. So we're at that point where, okay, now, as Houstonians, we understand that TxDOT has agreed to some amount of concessions. So I guess where do you go from here is, again, still very thin silver lining. It's, now you get the communities together and you hold TxDOT's feet to the fire and make sure that they follow up on those commitments in the memorandum of understanding. That includes pedestrian and bike improvements that they said that they would make. It's in the agreements. Cleaning up some of the debris and some of the leftover construction externalities in the parts of the freeway expansion that are by major residential and commercial areas. So, and it's also, TxDOT's going to be laying the concrete for a cat park on the east side of downtown. But now it's incumbent upon us as residents. I live on the east side. It becomes incumbent upon us as residents to be like, hey, let's go and find communities and businesses and investors that actually want to put something on the cat park to actually do what we can to restitch the neighborhood.
Yeah, I have experienced the park in Dallas where they stitched it.
Clyde Warren.
Yeah, I mean, it was very pleasant. I didn't realize there was a highway under it. I'm not encouraging that at all. I would rather just not have the highway.
And for full disclosure, there is a group, I'll plug myself briefly, and my great colleagues, No Higher, No Wider, I-10, is my neighborhood is being exposed to an I-10 expansion near me. We're trying to do the same thing. It's already below grade. It's a highway that's jammed right through existing neighborhoods. We'd happily just not have the highway at all, but at a minimum, I think if we could shift DOT thinking from win-lose to win-win for the next few decades as we find a way to unwind the Highway Trust Fund and stop the expansion, spending money, on restitching some neighborhoods, there are worse ways to spend some money, I think, even if we'd rather just not have it.
If you don't mind me asking, are you in District C?
That's right.
I just talked to Joe Panzarella.
Joe is my colleague there. He's a great guy. Running for District C.
Yeah. He had a lot of great things. It was a great podcast. I just put that out today, actually. So,
nice.
He sounds awesome. He's doing
great dude. He's very much while Strong Towns and Strong Towns Houston don't endorse candidates, I can say personally that Joe is a really swell guy. So great podcast guest.
So how do you see technical urbanism fitting into the Houston context, and what kinds of small experiments make the most sense there?
So, tactical urbanism it's really good. We really want to encourage people to go and do it. But the thing is, what the city is overbuilt is Houston. This is kind of, we're having to compete against traditional traffic engineering standards. So this is kind of our way to push back. And some really small experiments that literally I was just reading about one in the news today. In our museum district, there was this controversy about, local residents putting up these counterfeit stop signs on these like, dangerous intersections where, the stop sign was for people approaching the main street, but not for the people actually on the main street. But the point being is that a bunch of, residents, I think still unknown to this day, put up counterfeit stop signs to get cars to slow down, and they actually were measuring that, hey, people were slowing down, and it felt safer to drive around in the museum district. And just recently the city of Houston and the public works department put up those stop signs.
Wow,
So
that's awesome.
yeah, no, that's officially a thing now. And the reason why the stop signs were counterfeit, it had nothing to do with like, city priorities. It was just the stop signs were too small. So all the city had to do was just like, all right, make them bigger. That hopefully is like encouraging some folks to be like, listen, you can go out and put, chalk, paint, traffic cones to kind of like go do what you need to do and encourage traffic calming measures. But of course, you have to go through permitting, and that kind of becomes a pain. But the point being is that there are these like little small interventions you can do. Maybe not on some of the more super, super dangerous streets because they're just so wide and built like highways, but maybe like in the more local streets where you're still finding people driving recklessly or speeding, and the engineers and the city haven't really done anything yet. So kind of push them to do something.
Yeah, and I think what Ruben said at the start, it does cut both ways. We're overbuilt and we're stretched thin, but that can work to our advantage, right? I mean, we have a city that is so overbuilt we can't afford to maintain or improve our infrastructure. So we had actually a kind of a well-known local example recently. A few months back, we got a new mayoral administration. He came in and within a few months of it being built, a small pedestrian kind of refuge island, just a simple piece of concrete to help pedestrians cross Houston Avenue. He came in and ripped out this island. It cost about $200,000 to install, I think, something thereabouts. By the time it was all said and done, the removal work, which then ruptured a water line and caused a gas leak, or revealed a gas leak, the total bill for that was $1.1 million. So there was substantial disagreement on, what is the right type of infrastructure, and we were still hoping to work with local city officials to bring more understanding there. But the one thing everyone seems to agree on is that we are broke. But in a city that's broke, we can't afford to spend $300,000 or $200,000 on a pedestrian island and then $1 million to remove it, right? I mean, that's just not diligent. So for a city that's broke, I think learning to do more with low cost, quick interventions makes a lot of sense, right? It's actually compelling that you can go make it safe, not after 8 months in an engineering study, but you can try something tomorrow, get some improvement, and then when you are ready to rebuild or repave, you can do it right and replicate the design in a more permanent way.
This just popped up on my Instagram feed for some reason, but the roundabout, your mayor was talking about it. Could you tell me more about that?
Okay.
People just like driving over the center of it. I think that was in Houston.
Yeah, that was in Houston. I mean, that again, that was a roundabout that came about, I think, in the previous mayoral administration.
Okay.
And then, I think it was on the. If you watch the same Instagram reel that I think you're referring to, I think there's like the night camera footage of the car just like zipping right past and going over the hump, or excuse me, going over the traffic circle in the middle. So, I mean, that happened, and because of that, the mayor who did like a public event about it went out and saw and talked to some folks who didn't like it and were like, okay, cool, we're gonna rip it out. But I think they did that a little too fast, versus if you look at the holistic numbers, you look at what that roundabout did, that actually did slow people down. You just had kind of the odd bird or two who misused it or didn't know how to do that. Or, my favorite example of people not knowing how to use roundabouts is where they're on the inside lane and they yield to the person coming in. I'm like, no. Like, I wait for you. Like, go. So there may have been some confusion about how to operate that roundabout, and that got posted more. That kind of stuff gets posted a lot more than the average person actually using the roundabout correctly. And that grabbed some attention, and, mayor decided to rip it out.
You are an engineer, Matthew. When is it needed to turn a four-way stop into a traffic light, four-way traffic light, or roundabout, and like what are the advantages and disadvantages of having either?
We'll preface it by reminding everyone this is outside our expertise.
Okay.
One thing I will add that people should read. There's a Strong Towns book, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, and for those who haven't read it, it's a great book. One of the things that some insights that people would be well suited to keep in mind are that we try to solve mobility issues by getting cars to move faster when they're moving quickly, rather than maybe stopping less, right? The answer to safety, has to be that we understand that a road is a high-speed connection between places, and a street is a place. And when you're in a place with people, with pedestrians, bikes, you have to be moving slow. We can still try to get you where you're going efficiently by asking you to not stop as much, by designing intersections better. Oftentimes, four-way stops are actually better than lights in many cases because it allows safe navigation, and spending more time sitting so that more people can spend time going is kind of a zero-sum game, right? So, there's a lot of specifics that go into any given intersection, but I think, the biggest thing we'd like to see inverted is the priority, right? Moving vehicles efficiently is one of the lowest priorities in a place where we're trying to build wealth and prosperity. That is the Strong Towns insight, right? Building a great place comes first, and accommodating movement within that place at a safe speed comes after, right?
Well, for clarity though, the safety is actually the number one priority.
Yes, which is necessary to build a great place. That's right.
Yeah. I think it was a podcast with our Strong Towns president and founder Chuck Marone and another very well-known urbanist, Jeff Speck. I think they spent like maybe 2 minutes just like going on a tirade about how much they hate traffic lights. And I think it was Chuck who said, in an ideal world, you would get rid of every single traffic light and replace them all with stop signs. Now, is that going to happen? No. But, that's kind of like the idea or the vision that you want to think about, at least from a Strong Towns perspective, on like road, street, and safety. You want to basically get it so what Chuck Marone calls the unforgiving road design, where, we've designed streets so big, we basically have mini highways running through our neighborhoods. So we need to reverse that and instead have people be, attentive, focused while driving, and, not too comfortable. They can kind of sway in and out of the lanes. It's like, nope, I need to go straight. I need to be mindful of pedestrians. I need to be mindful of bikes. I need to be mindful of street parked cars. And by the way, there's a big red stop sign coming up. Let me go stop.
And by the way, the best designs in the Netherlands, Scandinavian places, they actually get away from even having stop signs, right? If you do a good enough job at this traffic calming and getting cars to safely navigate at an appropriate speed these urban areas, cars will just come to a stop by themselves, right? You're moving 15 miles an hour, give or take.
Yeah, what happens when you get a chemical or a petrol engineer and a lawyer talking about traffic engineering for 30 minutes?
And,
quite a bit, actually.
And a school teacher, gosh.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Okay. So, if you could change one local regulation in Houston tomorrow to make it easier to build stronger places, what would it be?
Matt, I'm chomping at the bit on this one. So
Ruben gets his first. Yeah.
So, for those of you who have not heard me speak in Houston, good. You guys are having a plentiful, enjoyable life. A little bit of self-depreciating humor. So, I've kind of taken a bit of a reputation in Houston as like the parking nerd. So that is to say, I would love that the city of Houston get rid of minimum parking requirements. I can go on about how bad they are, but I think I'm preaching to the choir at this point.
Amen.
That could be a bonus episode if you want.
Ruben will absolutely come back for a bonus episode just
all right.
Getting rid of parking.
I'll send out a Zoom invite.
We'll be there. Okay. No, I think it's good Ruben went first because I think you have to do that first before you get to mine, which is I would actually be very keen to see us adopt something like a land value tax. And, it's a little bit of a wonky topic, but for those unaware, if you want to see great architecture, nice, 3-story brick buildings, every developer pays a permanent cost on taxation when they build something nice. The more they put into a building, the more they pay in taxes every year in perpetuity. So a $2 million building on a $1 million piece of land pays the same as a little tiny drive-through shack on a $3 million sprawling piece of land. But that makes no sense from the city's perspective. The more land, the more area you take up, the more infrastructure and share of services you're getting. And so it really doesn't make sense to tax development based on, the quality of the building and how much you put on it, right? we did a famous one that we're circulating internally of 2 downtown parcels of land. They're both like 63,000 square feet, right in the heart of downtown. They're both worth about 25 million. One is a surface parking lot. And that surface parking lot pays about $500,000 in taxes a year because they put an $80,000 piece of blacktop on a $25 million piece of land, and so their tax bill is small. A few blocks up, there's a beautiful building right on Market Square Park in Houston. That is a $150 or so million building on a $25 million piece of land. They pay something like $3.5 million. So we've decided that for our benefit of building housing, retail shops, great buildings, you get the privilege of paying 7 times the amount of taxes as the guy who decided to just build a surface parking lot, right? That makes no sense. That's an inversion of our priorities. So until we get the incentives around, as urbanists, we love to talk about the regulations, the building codes, the infrastructure choices, but with that has to come land use and incentives that get the right style of development to complement those things. So my vote is land value tax, but you can't do it until you get rid of parking minimums, right? Because you can't force people to build parking unless and then tax them more for it.
Which I'll get off my soapbox in just one second. But, Houston has one of the weirder parking requirements with respect to restaurant and entertainment. Like, again, and it's weird because it scales up. So a bar, which, again, serves out, its primary purpose is to serve alcohol. A bar has I'm looking at the number right now, 14 spaces for every 1,000 square feet of general floor area, which also includes your outdoor decks, patios, and seating. So,
it's the highest parking requirement of any of our land uses is bars.
Is for bars. Yeah. I mean, right below that is restaurants, which, by the way, can also serve alcohol if they get a liquor license, and that is 10 spaces per 1,000 square feet of general floor area. So we have these massive, freeway-like roads and streets running through strong towns, we call them stroads. We have these massive freeway-style thoroughfares running through our cities, and at the same time, we are encouraging places where people drink to also build out parking lots that are almost quadruple the size of the actual bar. That's just a recipe for disaster of drinking and driving here in Houston. And we talk about, Donald Shoup talks about parking minimums from an economic perspective, which again, wholesale agree. But there's a huge public safety component to this too that I really want to bring to the forefront when talking about parking reform.
I really like the Strong Towns trend every year around Black Friday where you guys take a picture of a sprawling parking lot and look, it's not filled up with cars like you said.
Yep. Black Friday parking.
Full disclosure, I also run the Instagram account, so
okay, cool.
all of our Black Friday parking were, we got great photos from our members around Houston, and part of that did include me going to neighborhoods and commercial districts and taking photos. My wife, God bless her, she was like, "What are you doing today?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just driving, looking for empty parking lots," and she's like, "Okay, have fun."
Okay. For someone listening who wants to engage with transportation or land use issues in Houston, what is the most effective place to start right now?
So selfishly, join
Nudge,
Strong
nudge,
Town
wink, wink.
Houston.
Yeah.
Join Strong Towns Houston.
That was a softball question. Here you go.
Yeah. One of the things we say, because we're big allies of all our advocate orgs that Ruben named at the start of the podcast, and they're centered around, things from transportation and transit to air quality to walkability and safe streets. One of the things we remind people, kind of what we started off the podcast with, is that Houston is a very big city, but it is not a hugely mature city. It is not New York or Chicago. It really came of age after the car. It has been, even the historic parts were retrofitted for the car. And so, there's a lot of invidious comparisons people make about, our transit versus Chicago versus wherever else. And, I understand that, right, that tendency to compare ourselves to other cities of our population size. But, the reality of it is we've got a long ways to go, and we're in the baby steps, right? We have a lot to do around the basics. All those places where you build great transit and linear parks and all the things people want, the success of those is built off the back of basic stuff like efficient land use, mixed use development, safe streets, right? And that is what our focus for Strong Towns Houston has been, right? You got to get the basics right and then move to the advanced stuff. And we are still struggling mightily. So what we focus on at Strong Towns Houston is really getting back to the core stuff of things like parking minimums, things like getting incremental infill housing and good mixed use and safe streets. If you spend the next 2 decades of doing that in Houston, you will be ready for all the great transit and all the great other shiny stuff we urbanists just love, right? But you got to get the basics right. And, that's my cautionary tale to the urbanists.
Also for civic engagement in Houston, something that I like to tell people after, some of our meetings and conversations or whenever we're out in public is just like, listen, find out where this is fun in Houston. Find out what super neighborhood you live in. That's like the big, civic, because we also have civic clubs and civic associations, but, figure out who's in your super neighborhood, because they're the people who are very well connected to your city council members who you also need to contact. I will say, our city council members in Houston, even the ones that we disagree with about these issues, they are so accessible and so willing to talk. I really got to give them credit for that. Even if they know me as like the parking nerd, or they may even disagree, shockingly, they may disagree with me about getting rid of parking minimums. They'll still respond to my emails and they'll still say, thank you for this, or, hey, let's sit down and have a meeting in my office about this. And, they're so accessible. So find out who your city council member is. You have 5 at-larges, and I think, A through K. I can't remember a number right now, but find out who your district and your at-large council members are. Join your super neighborhood. Figure out when they meet. Start to talk the talk about strong towns with your neighbors, and also join your civic clubs and your civic associations.
Awesome.
We're all find within the city of Houston's website, by the way.
Okay, cool. I like to ask this question to all my guests. What are some books that you read recently that you would recommend?
Ooh, Ruben, give me a minute to think. You go first.
Well, I just finished Killed by a Traffic Engineer by Wes Marshall. That's a really good one. I think if you're like a knee-deep urbanist, like a really, really like into the weeds urbanist, one that's like doesn't jump off the pages is called it's a little dry at times, so pardon me, but it's called Seeing Like a State. I can't remember the author's name right now. I do have the book, but Seeing Like a State is a really good book because it talks about kind of the the shortcomings of the high modernist movement, and so your Debussy's, your Soviet era, and very top down forms of government, how they kind of had these really cool ideas in theory, but then when you try to implement them on the ground and you ignore the local context, they turn out like really bad and end up hurting your people more than helping. So Seeing Like a State really criticizes that and emphasizes that you kind of need to develop from the bottom up and meet people where they are to have more like effective policy.
I guess thinking about it, if I had, it's maybe not my most recent read. It's actually my inaugural urbanism book that got me addicted. But I would tell people to go read Charles Montgomery's Happy City. It is a fantastic read, and it really is about the human aspect of urban design and how getting to this isolated style of suburban building rather than building villages that are neighborly, that bring people together, that are conducive to that sort of vibrancy, has really not been necessarily the greatest trade-off. We might get a bigger house, or in the case Texas, a McMansion in certain places, but it provides us some of the wants we might think we want, but it also is very much lacking in some of the things we really need as humans. So the Happy City, really, how urbanism, I think, affects our lives or transforms our lives, something like that. Charles Montgomery, great read.
If you're new to urbanism and you want to learn more about it, Walkable City. Oh, it's hard to see with my Zoom background. Anyway,
I think I saw it.
Yeah, Walkable City and Walkable City Rules. Also a new one that came out. So Walkable City and Walkable City Rules are by Jeff Speck. Brilliant guy. Like arguably one of the founders of the New Urbanist movement, along with Andres Duany and Elizabeth Plater-Zeigberg. Also a relatively new one, A Love Letter to Suburbia by Diana Lisa. Really good intro to urbanism, and then on the back end it talks about how from a suburban mother's perspective, like how current suburban style development has affected families. So really good book.
You should read Melissa Bruntlit's and Chris Bruntlit's new book.
Okay.
They are in Austin right now, but
Oh wow.
unfortunately, they were having a
Wow.
whole book event, but I was like, gosh, I have a work event. I can't go tonight. And they were
Wow.
literally right down the road. Um, so I just finished their first book, Building a Cycling City, and that was really great. But they're on tour with that new book about that same topic, Ruben.
Nice.
Nice.
Okay, so where can people find out more about Strong Towns Houston?
Go to our website, strongtownshouston.org. You can email our local conversation leads at local@strongtownshouston.org. We also have a Discord where our members are very, very lively, including folks from other organizations who like to come in and chat. So if you go to our website, again, strongtownshouston.org, you'll find a link to the Discord. Join our email list, and let's get to work. Let's make Houston a strong town.
We meet every maybe month or two, roughly. So reach out, and we'd love to meet you in person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much, guys, for taking the time to coming on the show. Hope to hear more about you guys online.
Really
Yeah,
appreciate
absolutely.
it. Thanks,
Thanks for
Jacob.
the invite.
That's it for today's episode of Cities in Motion. Huge thanks to Ruben and Matthew from Strong Towns Houston for taking the time to share their work and their perspective on what change can look like in a city as large and influential as Houston. If this conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to check out Strong Towns Houston and see how local advocacy is shaping safer streets, stronger towns, and a more resilient future one step at a time. As always, real change starts locally, and it starts with people paying attention and getting involved. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with someone who cares about how our cities grow and who they're built for. You can find Cities in Motion wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and keep your cities in motion.